Welcome to this Angular DataGrid component tutorial. In this video, I will show you how to handle CRUD operations on the server side using the DataManager in the Syncfusion Angular DataGrid. I will also explain how to work with batch operations. First, I create a new ASP.NET Core web application with Angular as the front end. In the client side, I have already installed the Syncfusion Angular Grid component package on the application. Also, I have added the basic functionality, such as paging and sorting, to display data from the server-side data source. If you want to learn how to get started with Angular DataGrid, check out the video linked in the card or description. Next, I add the code to render the data on both the client side and the server side. Using the DataManager, you can create, update, and delete records from either a local data source or a remote data source. Now, I will configure the data source in the server-side application. I open the application and create a folder named Models and a class called Orders Details. Inside this class, I define a static list of orders details, which acts as an in-memory data source. This list is used to store and manage order records for performing server-side CRUD operations. Next, I add a default constructor, which is required for object initialization. I define a parameterized constructor. This constructor is used to create new order records by assigning these values to their corresponding properties such as order ID, customer ID, freight, and so on. Then, I create a static method named getAllRecords. This method is responsible for returning the complete list of order records. Inside this method, I first check whether the order list is empty. To populate the list, I use a loop and add multiple order records with different values for customer details. This ensures that the grid has sufficient data to demonstrate paging, sorting, and CRUD operations. Once the data is generated, the method returns the order list. I define the properties of the Orders Details class. These properties represent individual columns in the Angular DataGrid. Next, I will configure the API controller. I add an API controller named GridController inside the Controllers folder. This controller is responsible for handling communication between the Angular DataGrid and the server. Now, I need to install packages like Syncfusion EJ2 ASP.NET Core and Microsoft ASP.NET Core MVC Newton Soft JSON package. So, I open the NuGet Package Manager. First, I install the Syncfusion EJ2 ASP.NET Core in the application. This package provides ASP.NET Core server-side support for Syncfusion EJ2 JavaScript components. Next, I install the Microsoft ASP.NET Core MVC Newton Soft JSON package with the required version. This package enables JSON serialization and deserialization in ASP.NET Core. I import the necessary namespaces using directives in the grid controller file like models and Syncfusion libraries. At the top, I configure routing using the API controller and route attributes. This exposes the controller through the API/grid endpoint, which will be used by the Angular DataGrid to send data requests. Here I inherit from controller base because this controller is used for API operations. Inside the controller, I define an HTTP post method. This method is used by the Syncfusion DataManager to fetch data from the server. Next, I calculate the total record count, which is required by the Angular DataGrid to handle paging correctly. I return the data in the required format by sending both the result and the total record count. I also define an HTTP GET method named getOrderData. This method retrieves all order records from the Orders Details model by calling the getAllRecords method and returns them as a list. Let's look at how to integrate the Syncfusion DataGrid component into the Angular and ASP.NET Core project using Visual Studio. I open the terminal in the project's client folder and install the required Syncfusion package using the command npm install at syncfusion/ej2data-save. Now, I will configure the data source in the client side. First, I open the app component TS file on the client side. I import the DataManager and URL adapter packages from the EJ2 data package. In the export class, I define public variable data and assign it to a type called DataManager. In ng-oninit, I create a new DataManager instance and assign it to the data property. The URL option specifies the API endpoint that the Angular DataGrid will use to communicate with the server. In this case, it points to the Grid API, where XXXX represents the port number of the ASP.NET Core application. I will modify the port number with the specific local host value after building the application. Next, I configured the DataManager to use the URL adapter for handling server-side operations. The URL adapter enables the DataManager to send requests for reading, inserting, updating, and deleting records in the server using standard HTTP call. Next, in the program.cs file, I'm adding Newtonsoft JSON serialization to control the JSON property naming in the API responses. Next, I'm adding CORS configuration to allow the API to be accessed from any front end, and also configuring Newtonsoft.json to format the responses. Then, I'm enabling the CORS policy in the request pipeline using app.useCORS. Now I run the application. The following terminals are created. You can see the port number has been generated. Now I will replace this number in the URL link in the app component TS file. See, the data source has been rendered on the server side. Now I will show you how to enable editing. In the app module TS file, I import the edit service and toolbar service from the Syncfusion EJ2 Angular Grids package. Next, I inject the edit service and toolbar service into the provider's array. I navigate to the app component TS file and import the edit settings model and toolbar items from the Angular Grids package. In the export class, I define public variables edit settings with the type edit settings model and toolbar with the type toolbar items. In the ng-oninit method, I assign values to these variables by enabling editing options through allow editing, allow adding, and allow deleting to true. I also set the toolbar items to add, edit, update, delete, cancel. In the app component HTML file, I bind the edit settings property with the edit settings variable and the toolbar property with the toolbar variable. After this, I need to define the primary key column, since the editing functionality requires a unique identifier for each row. To do that, I set the asPrimaryKey property to true for the order ID column. In the output, you can see the edit settings and toolbar items are enabled. Next, I will add the CRUD options for the grid. In the grid controller CS file, first I add a generic CRUD model class to handle all CRUD operations from the grid in a structured format. I add the code configuration for inserting records. I add the configuration for updating records, and then the code for deleting records. In the app component TS file, I add the URL configuration for insert, update, and delete with the generated port number. Let's see the output. Now, when I add a record by entering the respective fields, you can see that the record is added successfully. When I select a record and click the Edit button, the record can be updated. Finally, when I select a record and click Delete, the record is removed from the grid. Next, I add validation to the order ID column. Data validation ensures that the information entered or modified in the grid follows specific rules, preventing errors and maintaining accuracy. I navigate to the app component TS file. In the export class, I define a public variable order ID rules and set its type as an object. In the ng-oninit method, I initialize order ID rules and set required to true. In the app component HTML file, I bind the validation rules property to order ID rules in the order ID column. In the output, when I try to edit the order ID column and save without entering a value, the grid displays an error message and prevents the record from being saved. Next, I will show how to enable batch editing on the server side. First, I navigate to the grid controller CS file and add the batch editing configuration in the code section. Then, in the app component TS file, I configure the batch URL using the same port number. In the edit settings, I set the mode to batch. Now, I can edit multiple records at a time and update those records. After making the required changes and clicking the Update button, you can see that the changes have been updated. In the Network tab, you can also see that an update request is sent with the modified data, and the server responds with the updated data. The changes are immediately reflected in the grid. Let's wrap up this video. In this video, I have shown you how to configure a data source from the server side, enable editing and toolbar actions, and perform CRUD operations and batch editing in Syncfusion Angular DataGrid. If you want to try out the example used in this video, download it from the GitHub link in the description below. I have also shared a link where you can learn how to obtain a free license key to use our Angular components through our community license, if you are eligible. Thanks for watching this video. If you found it helpful, please like it and subscribe to our channel.